The bullet was meant for Commander Ethan Cole. It was a 7.62 round fired from a concealed position in a bombed-out building across the square, and it would have struck him directly in the neck, just above his plate carrier. In the narrow gap where Kevlar meets flesh and where life meets death. But Petty Officer Second Class Maya Reyes saw the muzzle flash before anyone else did. She saw it the way a mother sees a car drifting into her child's lane, with an awareness that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to the body. She screamed two words that would echo through military briefings and Medal of Honor citations for years to come. "Watch out." And then she moved. Not away from the danger, but directly into it. She threw her body into the commander's path, and the round that was designed to kill the leader of SEAL Team 7 instead punched through her left shoulder, shattering her scapula and lodging against the rear plate of her vest. She hit the ground hard. Dust erupted around her. Blood began pooling beneath her body in a dark, expanding circle. And when Petty Officer First Class Danny Hargrove crawled to her side, weapon still raised, eyes scanning for the shooter, he looked down at Maya Reyes and saw something that haunted him for years. She was smiling, not grimacing, not crying, not screaming in agony as anyone would expect from a woman who had just absorbed a rifle round through her shoulder. She was smiling, and she whispered through gritted teeth, "Tell the commander he owes me a coffee." What kind of person smiles after taking a bullet for someone else? And what kind of life forges that level of courage? Maya Reyes grew up in Brownsville, Texas, in a neighborhood where ambition was often measured by whether you made it to graduation without getting pregnant or arrested. Her mother, Lucia, worked 2 jobs, one at a meatpacking plant during the day and another cleaning office buildings at night, and her father had left when Maya was 4 years old, vanishing into Mexico with a woman he had met at a bar and never looking back. Maya had one older brother, Gabriel, who joined the Marines at 18 and came home 2 years later in a flag-draped coffin after an IED detonated beneath his Humvee outside Fallujah. She was 15 when they buried him. She stood at the graveside in a black dress she had borrowed from a neighbor, and she did not cry. Not because she was not broken. She was shattered. But because Gabriel had once told her that tears were for when the fight was over, and Maya decided that day that her fight was just beginning. She finished high school with a 3.8 GPA, working weekends at a gas station to help her mother pay rent. Her guidance counselor told her she could get scholarships, that she was smart enough for college, maybe even a university in Austin or San Antonio. But Maya was not interested in lecture halls and dormitories. She walked into the Navy recruiting office on her 18th birthday and told the recruiter she wanted the hardest job they had. He laughed, not unkindly, and asked if she was serious. She told him about Gabriel. She told him about the folded flag that sat on her mother's dresser. She told him she did not want a job. She wanted a mission. Boot camp at Great Lakes was brutal in ways Maya had not anticipated. The physical demands were relentless, the sleep deprivation was crushing, and the psychological pressure was designed to break anyone who did not truly want to be there. Maya wanted to be there. She thrived on the structure, the discipline, the clarity of purpose that the military provided. For the first time in her life, she was not fighting against her circumstances. She was being trained to fight for something larger than herself. Her drill instructors noticed her quickly. She was not the fastest or the strongest in her class, but she was the most relentless. When other recruits dropped during runs, Maya would circle back, grab their packs, and drag them forward. When the barracks needed cleaning at 0300 after a failed inspection, Maya was the first one on her feet, scrubbing floors without complaint. She graduated in the top 5% of her class, and she immediately volunteered for combat medic training, knowing that if she could not carry a rifle beside operators like her brother had been, she could at least keep them alive when everything went wrong. She earned her Fleet Marine Force qualification and was assigned to support naval special warfare units, placing her closer to the tip of the spear than almost any woman in the Navy at that time. Her first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2017, attached to a Joint Special Operations Task Force operating out of Bagram Airfield. Maya was one of only 3 women on the forward operating base, and the reception she received ranged from polite indifference to barely concealed hostility. Some of the operators viewed her presence as a political statement, a concession to changing policies rather than operational necessity. A few made comments they thought she could not hear, remarks about quotas and social experiments, and what happens when you put feelings ahead of fighting capability. Maya heard every word. She responded the only way she knew how, by being undeniably excellent at her job. Her first real test came during a village stability operation in Helmand province. A 12-man team was conducting a shura with local elders when a young Afghan boy, no more than 10 years old, stepped on a legacy landmine approximately 200 meters from the meeting site. The explosion tore through the morning air and sent the entire team into defensive positions, weapons drawn, scanning for an ambush that never came. What came instead was screaming, the high-pitched, animal screaming of a child in unimaginable pain. The boy's right leg was gone below the knee. His left foot was shredded. He was bleeding out in the dust, and the nearest surgical facility was 45 minutes away by helicopter. Maya did not wait for permission. She grabbed her medical kit, sprinted across open ground that had not been cleared for additional mines, and reached the boy in under a minute. The operators watched in stunned silence as she applied a tourniquet to his right leg with hands that did not shake, packed his left foot with hemostatic gauze, established in 4-line, and began talking to him in broken Pashto she had taught herself from a phrasebook during the flight over. She kept him conscious. She kept him breathing. And when the medevac helicopter finally arrived, the flight surgeon told her that the boy would have been dead in another 3 minutes without her intervention. She had saved his life by running across a minefield without hesitation. That night, Commander Ethan Cole sought her out in the chow hall. Cole was the leader of SEAL Team 7's Charlie platoon, a man whose reputation preceded him like a weather front. He was quiet, precise, and deeply respected by every operator under his command. He sat down across from Maya, studied her for a moment, and said 4 words that changed her trajectory entirely. "I want you assigned." From that point forward, Maya Reyes was the dedicated combat medic for Charlie platoon. She was no longer a support asset attached to the task force. She was part of the team. And the men who had once questioned her presence began to understand that courage does not care about gender, that competence does not come with a prerequisite of chromosomes, and that the person you want beside you when the world is falling apart is the one who runs toward the screaming. Over the next 14 months, Maya deployed on more than 60 missions with Charlie platoon. She treated gunshot wounds in collapsed buildings, performed emergency cricothyrotomies in the back of moving vehicles, and once kept a wounded operator alive for 6 hours in a mountain cave during a blizzard while the team waited for extraction that weather kept delaying. She carried the same weight as the operators, hiked the same distances, endured the same sleep deprivation, and never once asked for accommodation or exception. The men stopped seeing her as the female medic. They simply saw her as Doc, the universal term of endearment and respect that military units reserve for the person who stands between them and death. But the toll was enormous. Maya lost weight she could not afford to lose. She developed chronic insomnia, lying awake in her bunk replaying every decision she had made during every engagement, wondering if she could have been faster, wondering if she could have done more. She saw a 19-year-old Marine bleed out in her arms during a joint operation when a femoral artery was severed beyond repair. And she carried that young man's face with her every single day afterward. She wrote letters to her mother that were full of carefully constructed optimism, describing sunsets and friendships and the satisfaction of meaningful work, never mentioning the blood under her fingernails or the nightmares that woke her gasping at 0200. Commander Cole noticed. He was a leader in the truest sense of the word, the kind of leader who understands that taking care of your people is not a secondary responsibility, but the primary one. He called Maya into his office one evening and told her something that she would remember for the rest of her life. He said that strength is not the absence of breaking. Strength is knowing you are breaking and continuing to function while seeking the help you need to put yourself back together. He told her that the bravest thing an operator can do is not charging a machine gun nest. It is admitting that the war inside their own head is one they cannot fight alone. He connected her with a combat stress counselor, not as a punishment or a sign of weakness, but as a tactical decision, the same way you service a weapon to keep it functioning. Maya resisted at first. She had spent her entire life proving she was strong enough, tough enough, resilient enough to belong in spaces that were not designed for her. Admitting she was struggling felt like confirming every doubt anyone had ever expressed about women in combat. But Cole sat with her through that resistance, and he told her that the men in his platoon, every single one of them, had sought counseling at some point during their careers. He told her that the strongest trees are the ones flexible enough to bend in the wind rather than standing rigid until they snap. She began meeting with the counselor weekly. She learned techniques for managing hypervigilance and intrusive thoughts. She did not become unbroken, but she became someone who understood her fractures and knew how to function not despite them, but alongside them. The mission that changed everything was designated Operation Crimson Gate, a direct action raid on a high-value target compound in eastern Syria during the summer of 2018. Intelligence indicated that a senior ISIS logistics coordinator was operating from a fortified residential compound in a small city that had been ravaged by years of civil war. Charlie Platoon was tasked with the capture or elimination of this target, and the operational plan called for a nighttime helicopter insertion followed by a ground assault on the compound. Maya prepared her medical kit with the same ritualistic precision she always employed. She checked every tourniquet, every pack of gauze, every vial of medication, every needle and syringe. She taped extra supplies to the outside of her vest because she had learned from experience that you never have enough when things go wrong, and things always go wrong. She wrote a letter to her mother and sealed it in an envelope marked with instructions, the same letter every service member writes and hopes will never be opened. She tucked a photograph of Gabriel into her vest pocket, next to her heart, where she always carried him. The insertion went smoothly. 2 Black Hawks deposited the team on a rooftop 3 blocks from the target compound at 01:30 local time. The streets were empty. The city was dark and silent. The kind of silence that experienced operators recognize as dangerous because it suggests that the civilian population knows something is about to happen and has taken shelter. Charlie Platoon moved through the streets in a disciplined formation, clearing intersections, scanning windows, communicating in hand signals and whispered radio transmissions. They reached the compound at 01:45. The breach was clean and violent, a controlled explosion followed by immediate entry. The first 2 rooms were cleared without contact. But the third room, a large central living space, erupted in gunfire. 3 fighters were barricaded behind overturned furniture, and the engagement was close, chaotic, and deafening. Maya positioned herself in the hallway, ready to move to any casualty, her weapon up, but her primary focus on the medical kit at her side. The fighters were neutralized in under 90 seconds. The target was found in a back bedroom, unarmed and compliant, and was secured without incident. It was during the extraction that everything fell apart. The team exited the compound into a small courtyard that opened onto the street. Commander Cole was the 3rd man out, moving toward the rally point where vehicles were waiting. And from across the square, from a building that had been assessed as clear, a single shooter opened fire. Maya was directly behind Cole. She saw the muzzle flash in her peripheral vision, a tiny star blooming in a dark window on the 2nd floor. Her brain processed the geometry instantly, the angle, the trajectory, the target. The shooter was aiming at Cole. There was no time to think. There was only time to act. She screamed, "Watch out," and threw herself into Cole's path. The round struck her left shoulder with a force that felt like being hit by a truck. She felt the bone shatter before she felt the pain, a deep structural cracking that radiated through her entire upper body. She hit the ground face first, tasting dust and blood, and for a moment the world went completely silent, as if someone had pressed mute on reality. Then the sound came rushing back, gunfire, shouting, boots on concrete, the sharp crack of return fire directed at the shooter's position. Petty Officer Danny Hargrove was at her side in seconds. He pressed his hands against the wound, feeling the warm blood pulsing between his fingers, and he looked into her face expecting to see pain and fear and the beginning of shock. Instead, he saw Maya Reyes smiling. It was not a delirious smile or a smile of someone disconnected from reality. It was the calm, deliberate smile of someone who had made a choice and was at peace with it. "Tell the commander he owes me a coffee," she whispered. Then she began treating herself. With her right hand, because her left arm was useless, she guided Hargrove through wound-packing procedures, talking him through each step with the same steady voice she used during training exercises. She monitored her own pulse. She assessed her own breathing. She told Hargrove when to tighten the pressure and when to prepare the four. And she did all of this while lying in a pool of her own blood in a Syrian courtyard with gunfire still echoing off the buildings around them. The shooter was eliminated within 2 minutes. 2 operators had flanked the building and neutralized the threat from a stairwell. But those 2 minutes felt like hours to the men surrounding Maya. Cole himself was crouched beside her, his face pale beneath his war paint, his hand gripping hers. He kept saying her name, and she kept telling him she was fine, that the wound was survivable, that the round had missed her subclavian artery by approximately 2 centimeters. Which she knew because she could still feel her fingers tingling, and a severed subclavian would have meant no sensation at all. Even in that moment, she was teaching. The medevac arrived in 11 minutes. When the flight medics reached her, they found a patient who had already stabilized herself, who had directed her own initial treatment, and who was still smiling despite having lost nearly a liter of blood. One of the flight medics, a veteran of hundreds of evacuations, later said it was the most extraordinary thing he had witnessed in his career. Not the wound itself, which was serious but survivable, but the composure. The absolute, unshakable composure of a woman who had chosen to put her body between a bullet and her commander and who regarded that choice not as a sacrifice, but as the fulfillment of a promise she had made to herself years ago at her brother's grave. Maya underwent surgery at a forward surgical team facility, then was transferred to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, and finally to Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. Her scapula was reconstructed with titanium plates. Nerve damage in her left arm required months of rehabilitation. She would never regain full range of motion in her left shoulder, and her career as a combat medic attached to special operations was over. The months that followed were, by Maya's own admission, harder than the bullet. Physical rehabilitation was grueling, a daily confrontation with limitations she had never imagined for herself. She had defined herself by her ability to perform under extreme conditions, and now she struggled to lift a coffee cup with her left hand. The combat stress she had managed so carefully during deployment came flooding back without the structure and purpose of military life to contain it. She had nightmares not about the bullet but about the boy in the minefield, about the young Marine who bled out in her arms, about all the moments where the margin between life and death had been measured in seconds and centimeters. But Maya did what she had always done. She adapted. She sought help. She leaned into the discomfort with the same relentless determination that had carried her through boot camp, through combat medic training, through 14 months of operations in the most dangerous environments on Earth. She worked with physical therapists who pushed her and psychologists who listened to her, and fellow veterans who understood her in ways that civilians never could. Commander Cole visited her at Walter Reed 3 times during her recovery. On the second visit, he brought her a coffee from the hospital cafeteria, and when he handed it to her, he said, "I believe I owed you this." They both laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that exists on the other side of shared trauma, deep, knowing, and healing. He told her that her actions that night had been submitted for a Navy Cross, the second highest valor award in the Navy. She told him she did not do it for a medal. He told her he knew, and that was exactly why she deserved one. Maya Reyes received the Navy Cross in a ceremony at the Pentagon attended by her mother, who flew on an airplane for the first time in her life to watch her daughter be honored. Lucia Reyes stood in the front row in a dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and when the citation was read aloud, detailing how Petty Officer Second Class Maya Reyes had knowingly placed herself in the line of fire to protect her commanding officer, Lucia finally understood why her daughter had chosen this life. It was not about war. It was about love. The same love that had driven Gabriel to serve. The same love that drives every person who puts on a uniform and says, "I will stand between danger and the people I have sworn to protect." Maya transitioned to a training role, becoming an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Combat Medic course. She could no longer kick down doors and sprint across minefields, but she could teach the next generation of combat medics how to do it. She poured everything she had learned, every technique, every lesson, every hard-won piece of wisdom, into her students. She taught them how to pack a wound and how to manage their own mental health. She taught them that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision that something else matters more. She taught them that the person who runs toward the screaming, toward the bleeding, toward the broken, is the person who changes the outcome. And she told every class the same thing on their first day. You are not here to be heroes. You are here to keep heroes alive. And if you do your job right, no one will ever know your name. And that is exactly how it should be. Maya Reyes never sought fame, never wanted recognition, and never considered herself extraordinary. She was a girl from Brownsville who lost her brother, joined the Navy, and discovered that the deepest form of strength is not the ability to endure pain, but the willingness to bear it on behalf of someone else. Her story is not a story of superhuman ability or impossible heroism. It is a story of preparation meeting moment, of a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice converging on a single instant where everything she had ever learned and everything she had ever endured found its purpose. She saw the muzzle flash. She screamed a warning. She moved her body into the path of a bullet. And then she smiled, because she knew she had done exactly what she was put on this earth to do. Her story teaches us that leadership is not about rank or title, but about the willingness to put others before yourself in the moments that matter most. It teaches us that resilience is not about never falling, but about how you rise and who you help up along the way. It teaches us that mental health is not a weakness to be hidden, but a wound to be treated with the same urgency and respect as any physical injury. And it teaches us that the measure of a warrior is not found in the battles they win, but in the people they save, the lives they touch, and the legacy they leave behind for those who follow. Maya Reyes still carries a titanium plate in her shoulder and a photograph of her brother in her pocket. She still has nightmares sometimes, and she still drinks her coffee black, and she still smiles when people ask her why she did it. Because that is what we do, she says. We take care of each other. And in a world that often feels divided and broken and uncertain, perhaps that is the most powerful lesson any of us can learn. Not from a textbook or a lecture hall, but from a woman who stood in the space between a bullet and the person it was meant for and chose to stay.